We have our very special guest this week. We have our nightly Zoom, and on Tuesdays, of course, we feature special guests. And we featured shluchim from crazy places in Myanmar and Taiwan, and guys who are participating in the broad national programs of Chabad from JLI and Chabad on campus and Tzivus Hashem and so on. And I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to get maybe a little bit of a different perspective? And let's get a man who's very involved with the Chabad locally in Columbia, South Carolina. Not a secret, my brother is the Chabad there, and my nephew, who's been our guest a few times. And I know Dr. Serbin for probably 30 years, ever since the good old days, more, when we used to come down and play a little touch football in between the Torah study. And I said to my brother, I said, hey, you think we could get Dr. Serbin, I know it's a busy guy, on and talk about his experience and his perspective? And he said, I'll ask him. And the good doctor was very, very willing and cooperative. So thank you. Thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it. Welcome to our nightly Zoom. So, you know, COVID has sort of brought about separation, but now in a certain way, it brings us together, gets a chance for us to get together via the wonders of technology, which we know you're a techno wizard.
I needed my IT guy to arrange it.
we really appreciate it. So let's get started. Maybe give us a little background. Tell us a little bit maybe about yourself and about your background and a little bit about who you are. Mira reminds me we dedicate our learning to the memory of Bilha Bas Devorah Avraham. Thank you for reminding me. And Doctor, if you could please just take a few moments and tell us a little bit about yourself and who you are, and let's get started.
So very briefly, I'm a primary care physician in Columbia, South Carolina. I have been the medical director of the same practice for 42 years, almost 43 years now, and originally from Philadelphia. So really a Yankee who came south, and they haven't succeeded in chasing me off. Despite the fact that the spring allergy season has already started here in Columbia. Sorry, didn't want to rub it in, but you know.
Yeah, we got 25 degrees of snow.
It was 80 degrees here today, and many of the flowers are in bloom. So in any event, I come from a very modest Jewish background. My parents both grew up in immigrant families that spoke Yiddish at home. But like most Jews in the 50s, non-religious Jews in the 50s, 60s, they wanted to assimilate. They did assimilate. And although we were members of a conservative congregation, I never heard my parents speak Yiddish, although of course they could speak it and understand it fluently. We had Christmas trees in my house until I was about 8. We didn't start to have seders until I was about 8. And the only reason that we did is because when my brother was going through his bar mitzvah training, my older brother, he asked my parents, what's up with this new, what's, Christmas tree and no seder, and, so obviously very modest Jewish background. I am still very marginal in terms of my Hebrew fluency. I'm not an Orthodox Jew. I'm a conservative Jew, but let's say conservadox, because I do many things that most conservative Jews wouldn't do, like the Modeh Ani. I chant the entire Kabbalat Shabbat service at home every Friday night, say the Birchat after almost every meal, and the blessings before, and blah, 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 and the Shabbat, Kiddush and all that. And a lot of other things that most conservative Jews wouldn't do, but I'm still definitely not Orthodox. And so I come from a somewhat different and much more modest Jewish background than many of your listeners, and certainly than many of my Chabad colleagues with whom I have worked for almost 35 years now on a number of seminal Chabad projects.
So you're in Columbia, you said, over 42, 43 years. And about 35 years ago, a young rabbi and his wife come down with nothing more than their father's 1979 Chevy and a suitcase full of enthusiasm take us back. How did you first meet my brother, Rabbi Hesh Epstein, and Chavi, his wife? And how did your involvement grow with Chabad there? And then we'll also talk about your involvement with some of the national Chabad projects. But can you remember like the first time you met Hesh? Like what was that like? How did that start?
Well, I was very active in many other Jewish organizations, being the local UJA fundraising chairman, men's division chairman, physicians chairman, young leadership, division chairman, and I was the chairman of leadership development for the Federation for years, and developed a number of workshops, leadership development workshops, which were adopted nationally. And I was also very active in the Council of Jewish Federations back when UJA and CJF existed, and rose to very high positions in CJF as a community consultant for small communities, and ended up when CJF and UJA combined about 23 years ago. I was actually on the first international board of directors of UJC. I was the small cities chairman for the whole world, and JCC chairman, and Beth Shalom, my conservative congregation, on various committees for Beth Shalom, and so on, but not Chabad at all. Knew virtually nothing about Chabad other than that it was one of these maniacal Hasidic sects. And so when Hesh came, of course, there were really no ultra-Orthodox people in Colombia. There were some Orthodox Jews who davened often in their own separate side chapel at my conservative shul, who were mostly Holocaust survivors and their families. But I first met your brother, Rabbi Hesh Epstein, just strictly by chance because of my being on the board of the Columbia Jewish Federation. And I wouldn't say that he was embraced enthusiastically. Most people had no idea what Chabad was. I mean, they looked at him and thought he was Amish. And so, and so at first I was polite, but really didn't quite know what to do with the alien in our midst. But as we began to, meet tangentially, and as Hesh reached out to me, as he did to everyone else in the Jewish community, regardless of their religious stripe, I realized that, and I guess he realized that, although I'm not Orthodox, I am a very serious Jew. And I had a lot of understanding about the community dynamics because of having served on all these national and international and local boards and so on. And so, he began to use me as a resource to help him cultivate the community. And of course, I began to use him as a resource to help cultivate my Yiddishkeit. And so the twain did meet. And so we're here to tell the tale, 35 years later. About 6 months probably after Hesh came to Columbia, we started studying Talmud in the original Chabad house, which was basically his living room and dining room. And I'm not a very gifted student. It took us 32 years to finish studying Pirkei Avot. And I do tend to be thorough to a fault. And so it did take quite a while for us to make our way through. Now we're on to greener pastures or other pastures. But as we were studying together for so many years, and then collaborating a number of community programs that Chabad was sponsoring or co-sponsoring with other organizations like the JCC or the Federation. For example, I brought Dennis Prager to Columbia one time on behalf of the Columbia Jewish Day School, which of course is operated by Chabad. So we collaborated on that and many more local projects. So at one time, 20 years ago or so, probably, Hesh and I were studying in his dining room as the kids were swirling about, some of whom are now, rabbis in their own right. So I said to him, it's a real tragedy that 90% of American Jews don't study Talmud. In fact, probably haven't even seen the inside of a Talmud. Wouldn't know that it was a Talmud if they tripped over, because this is the most intellectually and spiritually stimulating adventure I've ever been on. And it's just tragic that so many American Jews don't have an opportunity to seriously study Yiddishkeit. I'm not talking about a 45-minute spiel by a Chabad rabbi, about the meaning of Hanukkah, but serious Torah Talmud study. So Hesh and I sort of concocted a serious Jewish curriculum, sort of like a technical college of Yiddishkeit. And we brought this concept of a Jewish Learning Institute to Crown Heights and met with some of the powers that be in Crown Heights. And, so here's Hesh, a young shliach in the middle of nowhere, Columbia, South Carolina, Jewish population, 2,500. And me, a member of the great unwashed masses, not even an Orthodox Jew, as Gandhi would say, a member of the great unwashed masses. And so, needless to say, we were not very compelling, apparently, on our first presentation. But Hesh, greatly to his credit, started talking to a lot of his fellow shluchim, and he whipped them up into a little frenzy. And then they started bombarding the powers that be in Crown Heights. And finally, they said, all right, quit utzing. We will, what we're going to do is we'll have a trial program, and we'll teach you guys, because you eight guys have been kicking us in the shins. You're going to be the first shluchim to actually conduct JLI courses. And so we did. Columbia and 7 other communities. It was a trial program, a fall program, a winter program, a spring program. Of course, it was an enormous success. And the next year it was 16 communities. The next year it was 32 communities. The next year it was 64 communities. And now, as you know, there are JLI programs, the original one, in almost 1,000 communities around the world.
We've had Rabbi Mintz come on. We had him on one
right.
evening and told us a lot about its growth. Sure.
Rabbi Mintz and Rabbi Kotlarski, because of course Rabbi Mintz did most of the spade work, in fact, but Rabbi Kotlarski was the big king daddy. He was the guy who had to bless this project and give it authorization to proceed. Well, sometime later, it was actually an event in Washington commemorating, I think, the 5th anniversary of the Rebbe's death. May he rest in peace. And there were quite a few shluchim there. I would say there were maybe 400 or 500 shluchim there for this event in Washington. And of course, I had a lot of experience with the General Assembly of UJA, where I had spoken on a number of occasions and where I had led community delegations, and where I was, a big mahaf at one time when I was important. And so I said, look, there's no reason Chabad cannot do this. Chabad can have a national assembly. Chabad can have a national conference. There's no reason why we can't. So Hesh and I went back to Crown Heights and we pitched an annual retreat or annual conference. And of course, at first, the powers that be poo-pooed it and said, oh, don't be ridiculous. We don't have the expertise to do this. We don't have the staff to do this. You got to make all these catering arrangements and hotel arrangements and travel arrangements and schlepping to the airport and back arrangements and line up, scores of speakers and recruit hundreds of, P.S. Now the JLI retreat, I think we're getting ready for the 16th or something. is probably the premier program that Chabad conducts.
We had Hesh on live from the retreat this year in Georgia on our special, weekly interview.
Yeah.
And he sort of took his phone and walked us around, and we got to see a little bit about it. My parents are, annual participants. I've been there a few times, so we know about it. Now I want to jump in. I know Hesh took you to see the Rebbe. Many of the people who are on it, our program tonight never got to meet the Rebbe in person.
Right.
Can you tell us about that experience, how it came about, what it was like for you, and the impact it's had?
I tend to be not cynical at all, but rather skeptical. As a rigorously trained scientist and a physician, I tend to look at people and at issues in a very analytical way. And so when Hesh approached me and strongly encouraged me to bring my family to meet the Rebbe, to get $1, I was not enthusiastic. I'm very wary of cults, and I really, even though Hesh and I had established a good relationship by this time, it was about maybe 2 years into his tenure here, I was still rather wary about going to see the Rebbe and all this posturing of going to get $1 and all that. But it apparently was a great covet for a young shaliach to bring people from their community to see the Rebbe. And really, it was more for that reason than because my own personal interest that we went. And there, as there were these long lines, out onto the parkway. People would spend 2 or 3 hours waiting just to say hello to the Rebbe and get $1 and get a blessing. But if a shaliach brought someone from the community, they worked you in. So we got escorted in. We really didn't have to wait at all. There was very little time to sort of mentally prepare. And then there we are, the Rebbe greeting my 3 sons and my wife and me. And it was just really a momentary encounter, just enough to shake the Rebbe's hand, to get $1, a few comments here or there, look into his eyes. And it was probably the most remarkable experience of my life. It's something that you simply, if you never actually were in the presence of the Rebbe, you can't understand. You looked into the Rebbe's eyes, and he was like 90 at this time, and these brilliant, shining eyes, you looked into these eyes and you saw God staring back at you. It was that eerie. It was that spiritually evocative. And it was, for me, very disquieting. I stumbled away from that encounter thinking, I thought I was a big mahaf. And, I spend 20 seconds with the Rebbe, and I realize that he is on a different planet than I am. He's on a different stratum that I and, mere mortals like me can never achieve. It was that, earth-shattering, that disquieting. And on the one hand, very elevating to know that there really is a holy person, that holy, that remarkable. You can understand how the Catholics, could believe that there were saints with special powers. The Rebbe did not, anyone who met him knew he did not seem to be an ordinary human being. But so it was very elevating, uplifting in that sense, but it was also very, very humbling, very humbling. I've never felt the same way about myself since, which is good, because my previous, inflated opinion of myself was not realistic. The current one is a little more realistic.
Wonderful. Well, Doctor, we really appreciate it. We want to be respectful of your time. Can we ask you, what message would you have for somebody who maybe is just hearing about Chabad? One of the great things about Zoom is there are people who can just sort of dip their toes in. They don't have to be fully in. They don't have to show up somewhere. It gives them an opportunity. The Rebbe always taught us that every opportunity can be a good opportunity. COVID has brought lots of difficulty, but things like Zoom have given us a chance to expose people to Chabad in a little bit of what they may feel like a safer environment for them. They can watch things and so on. What message would you have to somebody who's just getting started from
I
your
will
perspective?
share a couple of my favorite vignettes.
Good.
Because my pearls of wisdom would be made of wax. So one vignette is the famous story about the Hasidic Rebbe who walks into the yeshiva, and he looks at all the yeshiva bachers and says, "Where is God?" And each one gets up and turns and says, "Well, God is everywhere. God is here. God is there. God's in the shul. God's in the Torah." And for every answer, the Rebbe says, not our Rebbe, but the Rebbe at that time, says, "No, no, no." So finally, they all in exasperation say, "Well, Rebbe, where is God?" And the Rebbe replied, "God is where you let him in." So I would advise people to keep their antennae up and let God in. As Abraham said, when God called to him and Moses, they replied, "Hineni, here I am." When God calls, when God gives you an opportunity, a God-given opportunity, go figure, answer the call. Answer the call. I am a Jew of absolutely ordinary Jewish credentials, as you now know. And yet God and the Rebbe, in a manner of speaking, put me in a position to have a significant impact, far beyond what I should possibly be able to do. Of course, I had the Rebbe's Army, or the UJA, or the Council of Jewish Federations, but when God called, or the Jewish people called, I answered the call, and I would encourage you all to answer the call. You can accomplish much more than you think you can, working in concert with your Chabad Shuluchim and with the Chabad organization, and of course with other Jewish organizations. It's remarkable what we can accomplish together if we answer the call.
Well, we have a special participant here who we've now spotlighted, someone you know well, who's been a guest here a couple of times. Look, I hope you have so many relatives and friends. Hesh. I'm running out of people that I know.
I have to interrupt and tell you that there was a Jewish leadership workshop that I was conducting in our community at one time, and because I was the national chairman of Jewish leadership for UJA for a while, and so I asked people, "Have you ever met anyone personally who's holy?" I mean, you've met knowledgeable people, you've met good people, observant people. Do you know a single holy person who you feel is actually holy? And the guy that's on my right on the screen, Rabbi Hesh Epstein, and his wife Chavi, is what people said, "Yeah, we know somebody who's truly holy." Rabbi Epstein and Chavi.
There you go. All right, Hesh, jump in here.
Them for
I would agree
sharing
with
that holiness with me.
Okay, everybody recognizes my brother, who we've had on
everybody.
before a few times.
Great
So-
to see everybody.
So what do you think of your good friend, the good doctor here? Does he tell a true story?
Dr. Serbin is very humble about his contribution to the various programs that he's described: Retreat, JLI. I don't know if he even mentioned Israel Mission, but he's a man who always says to me, "If you don't have a dream, you cannot have a dream come true." And that has been his greatest, I think, quality, is that he's not afraid to dream big. He's not afraid to take risks, not afraid to try amazing things, because he knows that if you don't, then you'll always know that you never gave yourself a chance to make those dreams happen. So he has been the wind beneath the wings of many Chabad events, both locally in our community, nationally and internationally. And I think he's as much a part of the Rebbe's army as any one of us.
Amen. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Serbin. Thank you to Hesh. Thank you to everyone for joining. Remember, tomorrow night, 8:30, we learn Mimer. We'll see you all tomorrow night. Thank you again, Doctor, for taking some time and sharing yourself with us. Appreciate it. Good night to everybody, and we'll see you at 8:30 tomorrow night for Mimer. We have a question.
Who said if you don't have a dream, your dream cannot come true?
I don't know who originally said it. It's certainly not original to me, that's for sure. But I rarely have an original thought. In fact, I'm thrilled when I can string together more than one lucid thought.
You
That's
wonderful.
beautiful. Can I quote you?
You may. You may quote whoever it is I'm quoting.
Okay.
You gotta look it up. Beautiful.
Thank you
Wonderful.
very much.
Okay. Good night, everybody. Tomorrow night, 8:30 for Mimer. Good night. Thank you again, Doctor. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
Good night. Good night.